time to begin. Good afternoon once again. We are still talking about Kierkegaard. He is very important and very interesting. I hope you guys enjoying existentialism. Like I said, most students do actually like it. Too bad we cannot discuss it in class, but nonetheless, let's try our best with this online format. So today we will talk in more detail about Kierkegaard's philosophy, and in particular, how did he disagree with Hegel. But first, let's go back a little bit, just a few things which you should remember from the last lecture. What did Kierkegaard consider the hardest task in life? What's the hardest task in life? Exactly. To become subjective. Good job, Melissa. Give you extra credit. You guys getting more extra credit than other sections because we are doing it live, right? But to be fair, I do offer other sections extra credit based on a different approach because they are required to watch these videos. Periodically, I ask them certain questions about what was in the video, and the people who answer them correctly get extra credit. Unfortunately, very few people watch the videos, and for this reason, very few people get extra credit, but there is really nothing I can do about that. I mean, to get extra credit, you definitely have to watch the videos, or for you guys to attend live sessions. But your attendance is not that bad, actually, this semester, comparatively to the previous one. Anyway, so the hardest task is to become subjective. Everybody's trying to be objective, but he's saying that's easy. Everybody else just decides this for you. To become subjective means to be yourself, to have your own unique point of view, and that definitely is hard. What was Kierkegaard's philosophic method? How did he try to explain that to others? Indirect communication. Again, good job. That's exactly what it was. Indirect, because he did not think you can directly tell somebody these kinds of things. You have to kind of help them into that. Just like, remember again, Socrates was saying that he's a midwife of ideas. The idea again is that you don't yourself create this. You help others to get there themselves. It's only valuable for people if they get there themselves. We, by the way, have a very clear problem with trying to talk about that in this class because we actually do have to try to explain Kierkegaard in more direct way than he would ever liked to be explained. Actually, that's one again of the problems he saw in Hegel. He did not think you can just give this kind of an explanation, give philosophical system and say, okay, this is how things are. But we have no choice, right? I mean, we do have to somehow get a grasp of his ideas, and especially since we're only doing it in 2 lectures, there's really not much I can do. I could advise you guys to read 5-6 of his books, meet up a year later, and then we could discuss it, but I don't think we have time for that, and I don't think you would be willing to do that, so let's just try to do it very quickly. Okay, what according to Kierkegaard is more important, reason or passion? That's an incorrect answer. Passion. He actually is, like I said, the whole existentialism is very dismissive of reason. They are saying reason by itself is nothing but an instrument. You have to have passion. Again, that's incorrect. Not reason. No. Reason is at best second place, if not third. Passion. Reason is again what makes you objective, isn't it? That's objectivity. But these objective ideas, as Kierkegaard was arguing, do not help you in life because they do not tell you very much about how you should live your own personal life. Ironically, that was also the criticism which Hegel had against Kant. So I often think that the way Kierkegaard attacks Hegel, he actually attacks Kant more than Hegel. But anyway, yes, passion is the correct answer. So he is known as anti-metaphysician. Why? Well, in one of the most important things that he did not believe that this logical approach which Kant had could ever get us to this reality, metaphysical reality. Any type of a system, metaphysical system you try to create, which he was accusing Hegel of doing, would be an intellectual mistake. There is a good quote here. He says in one of his works, if Hegel had written his whole logic and written in the preface that it was only a thought experiment, he undoubtedly would have been the greatest thinker who ever lived. As it is, he is comic. So what he actually says is that, well, that's a beautiful system, but how do we know it is a true system? How can you claim that that is indeed how things are? Once you start trying to present it as fundamental type of reality, you become a comedian, basically. You are a joke, because now you are what Hegel himself called dogmatic. You think that your system is the only true system. Another problem he saw with Hegel was that it's not very helpful to an individual. It is too abstract. Because you may agree with it as, a grand, overwhelming kind of thing ruling the world and moving humanity. But the question each one of us faces is not how the humanity is doing, it is how am I supposed to live my life? Me, this person, right? And he says that's not very helpful, because to answer the questions which I face on a daily basis, this kind of a system is not helpful at all. In fact, Hegel does have this little bit of the, I would say, dismissiveness of an individual. In some of his works, you see him saying that even the greatest individuals, such as Napoleon, are nothing but representatives of the spirit, and so the spirit moves, and that's what actually causes them to do all these great deeds which they were doing. But in reality, the spirit, or all people together, moves them. Note that this is also criticism against Marxism lots of people are presenting. What are they saying? They're saying this is impersonal system where the government actually takes all the control, and so all the people in this case together have all the control, but one little individual has no control. He is dismissed. But in the end of the day, all people together is nothing but a sum of one individuals. And each one of us is one individual. And so if you start dismissing that one individual in the name of everybody, then you essentially undermine everybody too. So he was saying that another problem we all face is that we are constantly in a process of existence. And since we are in a process of existence, the picture changes all the time. We are not complete yet. We're not done. And for this reason, it's impossible for there to be this whole existential system. That system assumes that we are done living and we can look at the whole thing from this kind of outside perspective, but he says we never can. So let me explain it like with this example on the board. So if you think about ourselves, right? There was a time when we did not exist before we were born. And this you can think of as infinity. Why? Well, it's infinite out there, isn't it? It's like, I know there was a time before I was born. But to me, it's like this huge, huge thing, infinity. Now, there will be a time after we die. And it also is kind of infinity. Now where we live is this chunk between them. But note that this chunk between them is constantly moving. Like, you can't exactly say that, well, I'm here right now, and that's what I am, because that's not what you are yet, is it? You will continue living, you will be changing, hopefully, until you enter this infinity. But even when you enter this infinity, you can't say anything about that, really. You can't say it is you, because at that point, what is you will become meaningless. So what exactly is you? And while we are in the process of going along this line, we are not complete, and therefore we cannot even talk about ourselves in that sense. So where do we find this self? Where do we find our subjectivity? That's to him a lot more important than all these generalizations Hegel is talking about. The Hegel system, he's saying, well, it's like traveling in Denmark with the help of a small map of Europe, on which Denmark shows no larger than a steel pen point. Still even more impossible. So think about it, like, yeah, you're given, let's say, a globe of Europe, globe of the world, globe of the world, right? And there is like tiny little, I don't know, United States, and somebody tells you, okay, use that to get from rainbow to, I don't know, corner of rainbow indicator to UNLV. And you'd be like, what? Huh? Even Las Vegas is not even here. And even if it was here, it would be a tiny dot. How am I supposed to do that? So that's what he's saying. Like, Hegel's system is a very grand system of everything, but that's not what we are doing on a daily basis. We live in our life not according to that system, and it's not helpful to us, even if it was correct. So what exactly is the existence? What is the goal of human life, first of all? For Hegel, the goal is actually try to go above your particularity and understand that you are connected to other people. More or less, this is true, the way Kierkegaard understands it. Universality is, in that sense, above particularity. Although in Hegel, the system kind of goes in a more complicated way, but nonetheless, the problem most people have is that they try to separate themselves from others, when in fact they are one with others, right? Okay, but Kierkegaard is saying, nonetheless, we have our own unique existence, and in that sense, we can never get to the point when we merge with others. So what if you take the phenomenology of spirit, Hegel, remember, doesn't exactly, you're not exactly sure whether he thinks we will reach this point of this absolute knowledge when we completely, the spirit completely understands itself. Nonetheless, it's kind of implied that we do, that this point is reachable. For Marx, that was communism. For Hegel, that was this kind of absolute knowledge. But what does Kierkegaard say? He's saying that's impossible. We will never get there. It's contradiction in terms. That's not something which can happen for a human being. Because this contradiction is inherent in us. Now, what do we need to do is to concentrate on our existence and do so passionately. There's deep within us this longing for eternity, the infinite, right? The stuff outside the self. So we long to be at one with these things. You can also look at it like this. For Hegel and for Marx, the most important relation of the self is with others, which is kind of a more or less two-way relation. But that cannot complete the story according to Kierkegaard, because there is our relation to God, which is infinite. And that cannot be made part of this, because it's not. He does not believe that us and other people, that is God the way Hegel would say it is. He believes that us and other people is just, well, more or less the way it is described in the Bible, right? So it's creation of God. It's not God himself. And what we can and should do is to pay attention to ourselves, to our own lives. And that's why passion is so important. Because passion is what brings us closer to this unique true existence. He's saying it is impossible to exist without passion unless we understand the word exist in the loose sense of so-called existence. And it is just this that it means to exist, if one is to become conscious of it. Eternity is a winged horse, infinitely fast, and time is a worn-out jade. The existing individual is the driver. So think about this. This is actually a good, very good quote. So think about what he's saying there. Eternity is a winged horse infinitely fast. Time is a worn-out jade. So we kind of, our existence has kind of created this, how can you put it? Well, eternity moving with an infinite speed, right? Think about the entire world. It's like if you remove yourself from that, if you look at it from some sort of outside perspective, it all happens instantaneously. From the Big Bang to whatever collapse, or maybe if there's no collapse, then it instantaneously goes into infinity. But when we are born, we actually are kind of slowing it down. Right? Because we're here and now time actually is no longer instantaneous for us. It actually, we can feel it every day. We go through it. That's what our existence is. But we are like the driver. And so what attitude we will take totally depends on us. He's saying that there's one attitude we can take is not to take it seriously and just, enjoy the ride. And then he's saying that the person who does that is such a driver when his mode of existence is not an existence loosely so called, for then he is no driver but a drunken peasant who lies asleep in the wagon and lets the horses take care of themselves. So if you're not consciously taking control of your life, that's what happens. You are like the drunken peasant. You're just lying there. Yes, time goes by, you're getting older, but you are not in control of your life. You're just letting life slide by. And that's actually what most people do. Many people take it like this, take it day by day, just enjoy little things and not even think about how important is it overall. So the only way to actually escape that, according to Kierkegaard, is to become passionate. Grab the reins of life. Grab it. Take control of your life. You cannot do this unless you enter anxiety, fear, and trembling. This is signs of you actually existing. The signs that you are in some sort of control of your life. And that's how you can try to achieve this authenticity of becoming the self. And the road to becoming the self goes through several stages in life. So this is now we can kind of try to explain it with a type of a system too. The stages on life's way, according to Kierkegaard, 3 stages. First stage is what he calls the aesthetic. Second one, the ethical. And third one is the religious. It's important to understand them correctly. In a way, they are similar to what Hegel describes in the phenomenology of spirit. There are some similarities, but there are very important differences there too. When Hegel talks about the way spirit develops, he also means an individual. And he also thinks individual goes through these stages, but they are stages of conceptual understanding. Whereas for Kierkegaard, they are more of commitments. Also for Hegel, they are kind of inevitable. They have to supersede one another. For Kierkegaard, they are not inevitable. You can get stuck in one and be in one for your entire life. So the first one is aesthetic. What exactly does that mean? Oh, another difference, by the way. Hegel thinks that this also equally applies to the society as a whole, to all people, right? So that takes place at the level of culture and history. The humankind goes through these stages. You go through them when you live your life, but the humankind goes through them altogether. Now, Kierkegaard disagrees with that. He does not think humankind really goes through any stages whatsoever. It's only the individuals who go through these stages. And again, they are not automatic. You can get stuck in one. So the first one would be aesthetic stage. How do you move between them? Despair. Despair is what the only thing which can cause you to move from stage to stage, because if you stay in that stage for too long, you get desperate. And that despair can actually, you can still stew within this despair but not move anywhere out of it. But in the same time, you can make this leap and move to the next stage. So inadequacy of one stage of existence makes itself felt in the experience of despair. Remember, this is actually how some of the review questions are marked. So that's why I concentrate. Okay, so now the aesthetic stage. So what exactly is the aesthetic? Aesthesis actually in ancient Greek means the feeling. So it doesn't necessarily mean aesthetic as in, you enjoy works of art, more or less the way we talk about aesthetic today. On the other hand, that's actually why that word was kind of becoming more synonymous with art, because you have your feelings engaged there. Nonetheless, Kierkegaard doesn't necessarily mean it as being artistic, although you can be, it can apply to art as well. It is just living at the level of your senses, impulses, and emotions. Pretty much everybody goes through this stage. That's basically when you enjoy stuff the way hedonists were thinking we should enjoy everything. And when we talked about, well, we didn't talk about that, but chapter 11 on Mill, utilitarianism, that's kind of the idea, right? You enjoy stuff such as good meals, you enjoy stuff such as sexual pleasures, you enjoy going to the theater, you enjoy stuff. And that basically is your entire life. You try to enjoy things. And you divide everything into these 2 categories, boring and interesting. You go to see a movie, you want to be entertained. If you don't like the movie, you say it's boring. But you try to find interesting things which actually entertain you. You can, the slogan of your life in that case can be described as, I have interesting moments, therefore I am. Remember, Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Well, in this case, I have interesting moments, therefore I am. So the entire goal of my life is to have as many interesting moments as I possibly can. If I don't enjoy myself at any moment, I am bored and therefore time is wasted. But when I'm enjoying myself, the time is interesting. A lot more people are in this stage than I guess they realize, because every time we talk about it in class, and we'll have a little bit of a poll later, and not many students say they are in this stage. I honestly suspect that a lot more students are in this stage than they are would like to admit. Anyway, so boredom is the root of all evil in that stage. But how does boredom come about? Well, there's two weapons boredom has at its disposal, right? Transitory nature of all experiences. We all know that. You enjoy something, it always ends. There's no pleasure, aesthetic pleasure, which lasts forever. Great meal. You enjoy it so much. Well, you ate all of this. Now you're full. You may feel pleased, but not as much as while you were eating it, right? That's the classic example all of us know. You go to a restaurant hungry, you order tasty food, you're very excited, you enjoy it, but in the end of the meal, when you're done eating, you just feel full, and it's like, why do I even have to pay for all this stuff now? I guess I have to, but that's how it is. And it's the same with everything. Great movie. I'm enjoying it so much. Once it's ended, okay, it's ended. You can watch it again, I suppose, but it's never the same, right? The best of them we watch more than once, but even with the best of them, if you watch it 10, 15 times, it starts getting boring again. So, transitory nature. And even if you enjoy something again, and you do it again and again, it becomes tiresome. Repetition of the same thing is never as good. You enjoy a certain meal, well, if you go to the same restaurant again and order exact same thing, we all know you're not going to enjoy it as much second time. And even if you do it third time, fourth time, sooner or later, you'll get, again, bored from that. You need something new. Constantly something new. So this is the aesthetic stage. How would a person transition to the next stage, to ethical stage? Note that Kierkegaard says we have no self in aesthetic stage. Why do we have no self in aesthetic? Why do you think you would not have a self there? Most people would say we do have a self. They would say, well, I'm the one enjoying it, right? Also, I am the one deciding what I enjoy. I don't enjoy this movie, even though other people do, but I enjoy that one. Doesn't it make you a self? Well, in this stage it is, isn't it? Because, I mean, how do you pick all these movies? How do you pick all this food? Well, somebody probably advised you. Somebody said, that's a good movie, watch it. Also, the movies are produced by other people who, of course, decide what the movie is going to be about. So when you enjoy that, you enjoy what other people decided you might enjoy. So where's you? What is authentic about that? That's the question. Note that that actually is a type of self which Hume was discussing. Remember Hume, what did he say self is? That's just this flow of constant senses. You see things, you feel things, and so on. And it's kind of like crisscrossing at some point, which is what you think is self. But if you try to catch this self, you're not going to catch it, because all you will have is this constant flow, the flow of emotions, the flow of experiences. So that's why Kierkegaard would say there's no self here. There's absolutely no self here. And that creates despair, because sooner or later you should and could and would get tired of it. But whether or not you will move to next stage, like I said, it's not necessary. Some people are stuck in this type of despair. They never move on to the next stage. So what is the ethical stage? What is this next stage? Is when you finally become self, because you become capable of passion. The true passion doesn't exist in aesthetic stage. It only appears in ethical stage as commitment. This is when you really have to distinguish things and good and bad, not on the basis of I enjoy it, I don't enjoy it, but on a more fundamental basis. That actually is kind of somewhat of a, I would say, what we may call Marxist Hegelian stage. So you do have passion here. Ethical person has passion. You care about something. And this something is not just your own pleasure. It is something more fundamental, and you can use it as a guide in life. None of it is actually really possible for a static person. But we're still not done, because even in this stage there is a problem with it. Why? Well, all these aesthetic values, again, like I said, just like in Marx and Hegel, they are universal principles. What exactly is good and bad, how you should behave in general, that is universal. If you are in that stage, you try to become a good father, a good husband, a good wife, a good son, and so on. But note that that is again kind of what society indeed is determining for you. So going back here, this is your relation then, your relation to others. That's what good father being. How do you know what is a good father? Well, look at other people. What do they think good father is? How do you know what good son is? Look at other people. What do they think good son is? Right? So, while you do have self in the sense that now you really want to live up to this level of being a good father or good son or whatever, and that is your true commitment rather than just enjoying yourself, you still do not have this full authenticity, because the relation to God is actually missing here, the relation to the infinite. Note that people who go to church, according to Kierkegaard, again are in this stage. Why do you think churchgoers would be in this stage? If they were closer to God, they wouldn't be in this stage, would they? Because the next stage is actually religious. Why do most people go to church? Is that to be closer to God? Do you need to go to church to be closer to God? We think yes. So God only can be approached from church. How do you decide to go to church? You just wake up one day and think, why don't I go to church? There's God there. Exactly, you can pray at home. You can pray in your head. But why do you go to church? There's a simple answer, really. Well, they do say that, of course. I mean, otherwise, why would you go to church? But in reality, you're doing it to be with other people who pray to God. That's the truth, isn't it? Other people who believe in God go to church too, and you want to be with them. Yes, exactly. At the very least with the priest, who is also another person. Now that is indeed something you cannot have in your head at home. Now that is something you actually have to go somewhere to, and that's why they call it church. But note that if back in medieval days, it was really an institution in a sense that they would build this ginormous cathedral, really impressive. Nowadays, what is it? Well, very often you can rent almost any kind of space, and that would be your church, and that's what most people are doing, right? You go there, today it's church, tomorrow maybe they'll sell it, and it will be, I don't know, a swimming pool. Then there will be no more God? No, because people are not going to be going there to pray anymore. That's why there's no more God. Note that the place itself doesn't matter. You can pick any place and say, this is church. But what matters is people should go there to pray together. Then it will be church. If nobody goes there, then what? God just periodically comes down to this place to take a look. Oh, nobody here. I guess the next time I come, maybe they'll be here. No, that doesn't even make any sense. The whole idea is for you to do it with other people together. But that's exactly the point here, because in that case, your relation is with other people and not with God. So that's the ethical stage. Now, how then do you get further from here? How do you get closer to your true, unique self? Now, one of the important things, and again, that's why we were talking about the fear and trembling last time, this important idea he introduces there is that the morality and ethics itself is not as important as God, and your relation to God is not determined by your morality and the ethics. And this is why he criticized the Church of Denmark. Remember, I told you last time that the Church of Denmark, people just gather together and pretend to believe in God, when in fact, if you truly believe in God, you don't need other people. That is your personal relation to God. So what you really should do is not necessarily go to church, although going to church may not be a bad idea either. Because it doesn't matter where you go. The idea is that it doesn't really matter. You can go to church or you can go to a swimming pool. God is inside of you. That's where you find God. Now, that produces despair, but this despair is different than the type of despair which Marx and Hegel were talking about. And the despair here is again a type of alienation. So remember when we talked about alienation in Hegel and Marx. So what is alienation for Hegel again? When we look at this outside God instead of looking at ourselves, at the people. The people are the only God. Now, what Hegel was suggesting is for us to understand it, and that removes the alienation. What Marx was suggesting is not only understand it, but actually do something about it and try to merge yourself with these other people. In both cases, we're talking about these other people. But for Kierkegaard, you don't go outside, you go inside. So that is the important difference. So the way out of this despair, go inside yourself and find God there. That is the religious stage. The religious stage is you finally do find this true unique self. And where do you find it? Surprise, surprise, within yourself. So that again, when we go back here, that's the important point. God is not here. Where is God? So that's why that is your true unique self. The God inside you. And of course you don't need relation to other people in order to relate to this God. Okay. So this is when you finally understand it. This is when you finally are in religious stage. This final stage. And again, not everybody gets there. In fact, it's again, we might question how many people get there, because the way he describes it in, for example, Fear and Trembling, from the point of view of Johannes de Silencio, who is the author of the book, not Kierkegaard. Mind you, he never called himself an author of this book, even though he wrote it. He's saying, my name is Johannes de Silencio. And then he's saying, that is the stage I cannot reach. That is the unique stage I cannot reach. So in this stage, the more conception of God, the more self. The more self, the more conception of God. Now, in that stage, you are naked in front of God. It's just you and God. There's no other people. Other people don't matter in that sense. You can't hide behind other people in your relation to God, because God is in you. So when I encounter the living God, I stand naked, free of my socially defined roles and free of my masks. In fact, it's even outside morality. It's even outside ethics, because morality and ethics do not replace this connection to God. Which is why he calls it in Fear and Trembling teleological suspension of the ethical. What does that mean? Well, the ethical norms are suspended. They are not completely denied, but they are suspended. Okay, so this is what happens there. Remember we talked about Abraham and Isaac. Remember the story? Abraham had Isaac very late in life because God promised him he will have a son. Then God suddenly tells him to sacrifice his son. He takes his son to Mount Moriah. He is ready to sacrifice him. The last moment he sees the lamb, he understands that this is a sign from God. Instead of the son, he can sacrifice the lamb. What is the suspension of the ethical? Well, what's the ethical behavior? Should you sacrifice your son? No, obviously, that's unethical. Why is he doing that? Or rather, why is he ready to do it? He never really does, but he's ready to do it. Why? God told him. God told him to do it, and he's doing it. He's ready to do it. Now, that's the suspension of the ethical. The ethical norm tells you you should not kill anybody, and especially not your son. But if God tells you to do it, then that overcomes that. The ethics comes from God, not the other way around. God doesn't have to obey any rules. Okay, he talks about two stages there too, the night of infinite resignation and the night of faith. And he tries to explain why Abraham is the knight of faith and how it is different from him, Johannes de Silencio. And again, remember, this is indirect communication. So Kierkegaard never tells us it's him. He's talking from the point of view of Johannes. And he tells this very interesting story. He says, in order to understand that how it goes, the first stage you have to understand is the night of infinite resignation. What does that mean? He says, well, imagine that. Imagine a young boy in love with the princess. Now, everybody tells him, you are insane. You cannot have the princess. Who are you? She is the princess. You're nobody. That's ridiculous. So, what does he do? Well, he loves her with everything in his heart. She is the goal of his life. She is everything for him. But in the same time, he understands that he will never have her. So this is the night of infinite resignation. That's why it's a resignation. You love something with the bottom of your heart, and you understand that you will never have it, but despite that, you continue loving it. He's saying this is very important. It's not just resignation in a sense that you tell yourself, it's not good enough for me, so I know I'm not going to get that princess, but she is not that pretty anyway. I don't even love her. No. That would be a mistake, and that would be a cheating. You have to love her. You have to love her with all of your heart. She has to be the goal of your existence. But nonetheless, you have to resign her. And Johannes de Silencio says, that is the stage I can understand. This is something I can do. Now, what is different about Abraham and what is different about the night of faith is that at that moment, when you truly, truly love something and resign it, you believe that nonetheless you will get that by the virtue of the absurd. So again, going back to Abraham, the story about Abraham is like this. He loves his son, truly, truly, from the bottom of his heart. He takes his son on the Mount Moriah to kill him, because he knows God told him to kill him, and yet he will kill him. But in the same time, he also believes that God is a perfect, all-loving, and he cannot make him do this. So, by the virtue of the absurd, his son will be given him back. And he was. So that's what Johannes de Silencio says I cannot do. I can resign. I can love somebody and resign. What I cannot do is believe that somehow, by the virtue of the absurd, this princess will still be mine. That's the hard part. But this is faith. This is the true belief. Despite everything, you have to believe it. Despite the facts, despite logic, despite reason. This is where reason is rejected. Your reason tells you, my friend, you taking your son to the mount with a knife and ready to kill him, you will kill him. You have to reject reason. You have to say, well, God wants me to do it. That means somehow it's not going to happen. I am completely ready to kill him. You cannot cheat. You cannot think to yourself also, yeah, I know God in the last moment will send me a lamb. No. You yourself have to be absolutely sure you will kill him. It's just your faith in God's goodness will have to be somewhere inside of you and tell you that's not going to happen, even though you are fully ready to do that. Okay, so this is the Knight of Faith. He's saying the person who has that will still do all the things we normally do. He would have normal family, he would go to church, he would do all this stuff. What's the difference? He will have faith. He will have that personal relation to God, which he says, I do not have. Again, Johannes de Silencio. Now, whether Kierkegaard himself has it, we don't know, because he doesn't tell us from his point of view. He's saying it from Johannes de Silencio. Interestingly, some scholars also bring his relationship with his fiancée here. Remember? He rejected her, even though he loved her and wanted to be with her, and she loved him. So whether or not there's any connection here, it's hard to say. He never says it point blank, but there's a good reason to believe there's some sort of connection. Anyway, so that's the true faith. That's the 3 stages, and they are also kind of like concentric circles. So you can look at it this way. If you are, say, let me do it a little bit different. If you are in a static stage, let's say this is a static stage. When you get to ethical stage, you stay also partially within the aesthetic. So you're not going to, reject all the life's pleasures. Remember, even this person in religious stage does not reject life's pleasures. So you obviously will still enjoy a good meal. You will be enjoying a good movie. It's just the ethical values will be more important. And the final religious stage for you would again engage these two. So the person who has this personal relation to God will still enjoy a good meal. He will still go to church. He will still be a good father. It's just his relation to God would overcome all that, and they'd be more important than all that. Okay, so let's do it. Where would you place yourself in terms of Kierkegaard's 3 stages? Let's do a poll. A would be aesthetic, B ethical, and C religious. So 3 people are in aesthetic, 8 people in ethical, and 1 person in religious. Oh, wow. Congratulations. That is, of course, quite something. But nonetheless, like I said, that's always the case. Most people do not place themselves in aesthetic stage, even though I suspect, and I can't judge anybody, I don't know anything about you guys to judge that, but I suspect more people are in aesthetic stage really than we would like to believe we are. Of course, in reality, most people do not place more value on those ethical values, on morality, than on their own aesthetic pleasures. That takes quite a lot of growing up and experience to indeed get into that stage. And typically it happens when you have children of your own family and so on, rather than for young people. But nonetheless, and of course the religious stage, the way Kierkegaard describes it, like I said, you may even doubt whether anybody is in this stage. Then again, maybe some people are. But but certainly is quite an achievement. Okay, do you think these three categories are adequate? Do they completely describe the range of possibilities we can take, the stance we can take towards life? Note that, like I said at the beginning, it's a little bit of cheating Kierkegaard, because we are trying to put him into the system. We are saying, well, that's his system. And he himself would, of course, really reject that. This is what you can gain from his work, but nonetheless, again, he's using method of indirect communication. He does not want to give us any system. So by us doing that, he would say we are completely misunderstanding him. So in that sense, he would never commit to the three-stage theory himself. Nonetheless, it obviously helps us to understand what he means. And what he means is, of course, again, that we can only find that relation to God within ourselves. That's the most important part of the whole thing. And you can only do it yourself. Again, nobody can explain it to you and tell you, oh, you are stuck in that aesthetic stage or ethical. You have to move on. You have to go to religious stage, because for somebody to tell this to you, that would be meaningless. You have to find that yourself and find it within yourself. You have to reach the despair there, and then you have to overcome that despair by going into the next stage. And note that when you are in religious stage, you are not done with despair. In fact, despair, anxiety, and the fear will always be with you, because it's part of existence. It's fundamental part here. And one of the most important points, again, about his philosophy is that that cannot be overcome. There's no solution. Hegel thinks there is a solution. He is lying, or he is mistaken. If he thinks we can ever reach this point of absolute knowledge where we are happy and nothing disturbs us, he then is delusional. Now, whether he actually is saying that or not is a different question, but if he is saying that, Hegel, then he is obviously wrong. Because, and I guess in that I can agree with Kierkegaard, that that cannot be reached. That process of dialectic is infinite. There is always antithesis to your thesis, and there is always another synthesis. So no matter how far down that ladder you go, there is always one more step. You're never done with it. As long as you're alive. Then what happens when you die? Well, it's hard to say. Perhaps the whole ladder disappears and it no longer matters. Okay, so the Christianity, according to Kierkegaard, is the paradox of the absurd. And he keeps on saying that, but of course, again, not himself, through the words of these characters who are writing his books. He's saying that it is a paradox of the absurd. To believe in Christianity, you have to believe in the absurd. What's absurd about Christianity? What do you guys think? Is there anything absurd about it? Yeah, the burning bush. But even the most fundamental thing about the whole story of Christ, what's the most fundamental? Resurrection, exactly. He was dead, and then he came back to life. Now, if you're using your reason, is that reasonable to suggest? No, it's absurd. It's paradox. That's what he's saying. If you're Christian, you have to believe in absurd. You have to believe in paradox. You have to believe that impossible is possible. Just like with, again, Abraham and his son Isaac, who believed, despite everything, that his son will be saved, even though he was going to kill him. Similarly here, you have to believe that a person can be killed and then come back to life. And he's saying you cannot explain it with reason, and if you try, then you are going in the wrong direction. You are really not even trying to be Christian, because you are completely confused about what does that mean. He's saying that even trying to figure out this historical figure of Christ is, again, somewhat of a mistake, because you cannot find historical records and try to prove to yourself beyond reasonable doubt that Christ indeed existed and that he was resurrected. You have to believe that. And that's the whole point. If you need any kind of proof of that, you already are on the wrong road. Not towards belief, not towards faith, but towards something else. And that in that case, you will never get there, because nobody will be able to prove to you beyond reasonable doubt that Christ indeed existed and got resurrected. So, from his point of view, the whole thing is indeed absurd and a paradox. But what else is absurd and paradox? Our own existence. That's the one ultimate thing we all have direct access to. We exist. What the hell? How? Don't you ever ask yourself this question? Why am I who I am? Why was I born on that date as this person? And not like on some other date as some other person? What's the explanation? Shouldn't there be some sort of reason for that? But what's the reason for that? I mean, I can see the reason for birth of all other people. I can see that John was born on 15th of December because his parents, Mary and Peter, had shenanigans 9 months before that, and then, of course, the science tells us that as a result of that, a child will be born. Great! Why am I born? Me, that very unique person. Why am I this person? Can you answer that? Yeah, that there's no explanation. That's a paradox. That is the paradox. This is absurd. It's truly absurd. What the hell am I? And each one of us, again, has this. Because we are living, existing human beings. If you were a spirit somewhere above the world, looking at what's going on, easy to explain everything. Yeah, there's all sorts of animals. There's this evolution. The animals evolve. Great. People are being born. Blah, blah, blah. Everything explained. But once you're part of that whole thing, once you look at it from inside, once you have this unique, your own point of view, that no longer is explainable. That you part, the part of you being here, now, playing a role in all that, has no explanation. This is the absurdity. This is one thing which indeed is missing from Hegelian system. He does not take that into account. This is one thing which Marx doesn't even really discuss. He takes it for granted. Yeah, there are people. Yeah, there is a revolution, evolution, and all that. But you, unique person, you, is not part of that. So this is important to understand about Kierkegaard. Well, God wanted it this way. Is that really an explanation? What does that really mean? I mean, that again seems... Why would God want it this way? In other words, it's just other way of saying, I have no idea. Right? In that case, it's not an explanation at all. It's just like, well, why would God want it? Well, it's a mystery. So it's a mystery either way. It's just a mystery. Why would God decide to put you in this body? Who knows? Right? Okay, so he calls Christianity itself a crucifixion of understanding. He's saying you cannot use understanding here. Absurd is the object of faith. The only object that can be believed is the absurd. If you have reason to believe something, that's no longer faith. Christianity has declared itself to be the eternal, essential truth which has come into being in time. It has proclaimed itself as a paradox, and it has required that of the individual the inwardness of faith in relation to that which stamps itself as absurdity to the understanding, which is definitely true. And he calls us to relinquish understanding, relinquish thinking. So do the opposite of what Hegel and Marx call us to do, to keep soul fixed upon the absurd. And that is the only thing for him to reach that kind of understanding of your true self. Okay, well, one more discussion So do you agree with that? Do you think his position makes sense? Let's do another poll here. So note that all these attempts to prove the existence of God, which again were undertaken by St. Anselm, by Aquinas, by Descartes, Kierkegaard would tell us they're completely wrong. They like heading in the wrong direction. You cannot prove the existence of God. You cannot use reason to prove the existence of God. Because if you ever are able to prove the existence of God, faith disappears. Then it's like mathematical formula. Then you have no choice but to actually believe it. And if you have no choice, that's it. Then there's no longer faith. So the only way for you to truly believe is just take this leap of faith. Again, just like Socrates. Remember, Socrates said before his death, mentioned it last time, he said, I don't know what will happen after I die. Maybe nothing. Maybe there is nothing there. But I live my life as if there is something there. And that's why I'm not afraid to die, because either way I'm okay. If there's nothing there, well, there's nothing there. But if there is something there, I'm not ashamed of my life. If there is God there, who will greet me and ask me, how did you live your life? I have something to answer. Taking a leap of faith. Whereas for many people, it's like, since we don't know if there's God there, how about I cheat a little bit? I live my life whatever way. And then if there's no God, great. And if there is God, well, everybody kind of sins. Everybody lives like this. So it's okay too. Right? I mean, I'm probably not the worst person. I've sinned here and there, but, everybody does. Okay. So, anybody else wants to answer? 10 people? Well, fair enough. So, 10 people answered, 7 people agree, 3 people disagree. Well, obviously, it would be more interesting why you disagree. Why do you disagree? Anybody wants to elaborate on that? What specifically you disagree with? Why do you disagree? What strikes you as odd about this position? Anything? What could be problematic? Well, one thing which many people pointed out is that if you take this kind of approach, can you just believe anything? I mean, isn't it in the end of the day still a question of specific faith and specific way to practice Christianity? So if you start saying like, oh, it doesn't even matter whether there was Christ or not, I just believe it. Well, doesn't it matter? So if there was never any Christ, does you just believing that makes it okay then? Don't you want to still kind of like believe in something which is true? Doesn't it seem like in that case anything goes? You can believe in unicorns as long as you do it passionately? That's a question, because a lot of people then would say, well, how is it even Christianity? Why not be passionate Muslim or, I don't know, passionate Buddhist? It seems like there's no difference. And the way he does kind of say that, remember when he says that if you have this true faith in your heart, but you praying to the idol, it's better than if you don't have it, but you praying to the true God. So, in a sense, he is then saying that it doesn't really matter what you believe. It's as long as you believe it passionately enough. But that seems to be kind of a strange position, and no wonder that obviously church would reject it. Right? So in that case, that subjectivity basically just means whatever you personally decide is true. So now you're kind of dismissing indeed Socrates as well, because Socrates, according to this, was also in a static stage. He never talked about reaching his personal relations with God. he did have a demon who was advising him not to do certain things, but that's not really a God of Christianity, or any God for that matter. It's a little bit more of a, I don't know, internal voice. So that's one of the problems which any person of faith really kind of faces, and it doesn't necessarily go away. If you believe something and you believe it passionately, do you care if it's true? If the answer is no, I don't care if it's true, I just believe it, there is a problem. But if the answer is yes, I care whether it's true, then you can again look at the Kierkegaard's criticism as like, well, then don't you need like historical evidence? Don't you need some additional objective evidence to believe that? Because if that's just whatever, then you may be believing in fairy tales very passionately. Now you can kind of see, remember we started talking about Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. Nietzsche, who was also existentialist and, like I said, passionate atheist, because going down the same road, you can obviously reach an opposite conclusion, and he did. And he, while in many ways agreeing with Kierkegaard, rejecting like this Hegelian Marxian approach, rejecting this kind of collectivism, rejecting this type of importance of other people, nonetheless he kind of reaches the opposite conclusion in terms of God. He's saying, well, but there's no God, and you just have to accept that. And it's a very big leap you have to take, a brave one, but you have to take it, because let's face it, there is absolutely no evidence that there is God, so you're just making it up. That's what Nietzsche kind of says. Well, can you suggest anything else? You either deluding yourself from the truth, or you wouldn't follow the religion you believe in that truth. Note that you can follow the religion by just saying, well, I don't care, I believe in it, and that's it. But does it make it true? Like, how would you approach it scientifically? How would you approach it if you want to find out whether Christ was really resurrected? Well, yeah, you would look for evidence. So you go looking for evidence, what would you find? You would find the testimony which we have in the New Testament, which is basically the account of certain witnesses. Now then you would have to ask yourself, how reliable are these witnesses? Can we be sure they're telling us the truth? Now, you know, in today's world, you have witnesses saying opposite things. Certain people will tell you one thing happened, certain other people will tell you the opposite thing happened. How do you find out what the truth is? Well, hopefully you have a video or something. Now, video is more reliable, even though you can... It seems like now you can also falsify the video because they have all these tools. But that is still rare, and they can usually find that out. But do you have a video of Christ being resurrected? Do you have any kind of evidence like this? No, you have to trust certain people who lived at that period. We don't even know exactly who these people are. Like if you look at the who wrote New Testament, well, we have like Mark, we have John. You're not even sure who are these people. You're not even sure if they themselves wrote it. So whose evidence is it exactly? How reliable is it? If you go down that road, and mind you, you don't have to obviously, but if you go down that road, you will have to conclude what? That there's no strong evidence for that. There's just hearsay, basically. And of course, given our experience today, how many people do you see resurrected? What do you know about biology? Is that even possible? You would again have to conclude that that is impossible. So that's why it is absurd. So if you believe it, obviously, you are believing it based on just your conviction. You are not believing it based on the facts. There's no facts to support that. And so for this reason, you are believing in the absurd. So while obviously I'm not saying whether you should or should not believe it, but you should realize that. You should give yourself the reality check in a sense, that you are believing the absurd. You are believing something which, based by reason, if you go approach it with reason, could not have happened. So you're rejecting reason and you going with your faith. And that's what Kierkegaard is saying. That is just exactly what he's saying. That is what you're doing. And he's saying that is okay to do that. He's saying this is normal for us to do that. Because this is what makes us this existing human beings and not just some sort of logical machines. But that's why he's rejecting reason. He's saying reason itself is not going to tell you that. The most important things you approach through your feelings, through your faith. Okay, well, that's basically where we are heading with this stuff. And again, note that obviously there are still people today who believe in God, who read all these philosophers, and who nonetheless disagree. So this is by no means some sort of a compelling evidence. Kierkegaard brings very good point out there, again, about you as an individual having this first-hand experience. And that indeed also being a paradox. And that indeed also is not explained by science in any way. The science will never explain to you why you are you. The science can explain to you why these other people are born from the other people and evolution and all that stuff. It cannot explain why you are you. And what does that even mean? So in that, Kierkegaard is right. That one thing is there. And we will see how, again, that also kind of the approach taken by some of the other philosophers is similar. Because that is one thing you cannot dismiss. Now, you don't have to explain it with, obviously, Christianity. You don't have to even explain it from the point of view of religion. But nonetheless, you have to somehow explain it. And science does not give us an explanation. Science simply doesn't know. Okay, so for next week, for Monday, please read chapter 14 on pragmatism, our American philosophy, American response to all this European stuff. Kind of interesting too. By the way, it is closely connected to Hegelian philosophy. Do your homework and quiz for chapter 13 on Kierkegaard, and with that, we are done for this week. I will see you guys on Monday for our next lecture. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and there's still more good stuff to come. The remaining philosophers are all very interesting. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend. I'll see you on Monday.